You're the most discerning audience we're going to have this conference, because you could see through that Bitcoin, Brexit and bots was actually the name of a legal firm, and the other session was going to be really boring. We're going to go beyond AX and make this AX. We're going to make it audience experience. So we want, after the gala dinner, you'll be full of creative juice and all that sort of stuff, and we want you to interact as much as you can. I've had to rewrite the script a little bit. I haven't informed the panellists, so that's not unusual for me. And the reason for that is that we've been AX, UX and brand soaked this conference. I think this might be the 14th or 15th session on this type of subject. So I thought what I'd do to start off is sort of recap. So I haven't been to every session, obviously, because there's only one of me. We haven't quite got to cloning. That's not a technology we're going to explore today, thank God. But we heard all different types of ideas, and I think one of the difficulties I've had in it all is trying to distill that down and look at what the future might look like, and what should I do in the future to take advantage of these things? How do I distill what's important and what's not? So the panel here today is going to try and work through some of the things that I'm going to summarise some of the things I've taken out of it, and then we'll work through that over the course of this. Ehrenberg Bass Institute, a very clever guy called Ari, I couldn't get his surname, but he told us that utility is the winner. All the scientific research they do tells you utility is the winner. Others tell us all about customer experience, that brands are, in the voice-driven world, brands are going to disappear, we're all going to be run on algorithms, and it's all going to get pretty scary, and really there's no point in having a brand, just a good search engine strategy. Others have told, and that's the era of voice could kill our brands with its algorithmic view of what's best of us. In the midst of all the disciples of UX and AX, Adam Ferrier asked us to think, what would Batman do if he was running a super fund? The man who donned the guise of the thing he most feared, which was bats. And he talked about looking at what you perceived weaknesses were and perhaps seeing them as a point of difference and building them out, being brave and building them out as a point of differentiation. If I can share just some of the, we at Equip, we do a lot of research. We try and do evidence-based decision making in our product design, our marketing, our service design. And two of the things that emerge for me as drivers of satisfaction are utility, as Ehrenberg Bass said, but also how much you care about me. I think you can almost look at any metric that we measure for member satisfaction, and you can roll it up to one of those two things. Am I easy to do business with, and do you care about what you're trying to do for me, what I'm asking you to do for me? So what are we to make of this? If CX is indeed the king, what does it look like in the future, and how can we make our brands shine through? I'll now introduce, before I introduce the three panels, I must mention our poll. It'll be on the screen as we speak, and we've got to say, now there's only one answer to this, of course, because you're in this session. But what do you think is most important to your members? Customer experience, investment returns, or reduced fees and costs? In other words, has Compare the Pair worked? So while you're doing that, I will take time now to introduce our guests. I'll start on my far right. Rob Farmer is a director of a company called The Inside Out, which in itself is an interesting name. It's a brand and marketing consultancy. Rob moved to Australia with his family, and as he did that, he led the Foxtel team that played a central role in creating a new course for the business and the brand. Previously, Rob worked in the UK at the commercial broadcaster ITV, and was a director of one of the world's leading creative agencies, BBH, where he led the team for the agency's flagship, Levi. Are they Levi's?
They're not.
No, okay. So obviously the advertising failed and he got another job. His education includes reading psychology and philosophy at Oxford. Well equipped for this session. Angus Stevens is, on my right, is Managing Director of Start VR. So let me assure you, you are awake. This is not virtual reality. This is a real session. After a decade directing television, TVCs, documentaries and brand marketing comms, Angus made the shift into digital, launching Southern Cross Austereo's digital video strategy, before building Nova Entertainment to be one of Australia's most popular entertainment sites. Now, this is a really interesting thing about Angus, because I'm going to actually question him about this. I haven't told him this. He's directed and produced across a diverse range of genres and platforms, including working with artists such as Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, U2, Lily Allen, Coldplay and Lady Gaga. And we are going to explore the difference between working with Lady Gaga and a super fund. Whilst at Start VR, he's worked with Australia's leading business and overseas businesses and devised creative, commercially driven virtual reality experiences and so on. So we're going to explore something brand new. We haven't talked about VR in the whole conference as far as I know. Elaine Herlihy, she's a stabilising influence on the panel. She's Marketing Director of PayPal. Obviously we all know PayPal. They're the people who guarantee if we don't get our goods, they give us our money back. Responsible for customer growth and engagement in Australia. Under her leadership in 2017, PayPal was named Australia's most trusted brand by Ipsos and most recommended brand in financial services by YouGov. Previously, Elaine led brand and marketing functions at Westpac. She's a board member. She does know about super. She's a board member at Mind, Wealth and Wellbeing since February 2017. So I'm going to ask each of these people to talk about 3 areas of differentiation, but let's see how the poll's going. Oh dear, I'm going to have to ask 52% of you to leave. Investment returns is the key driver is the most important thing for members. I think we may have to convert you here. This is going to turn into an evangelist session. So we'll come back to that later. I'm going to ask each of our panellists to talk about 3 drivers of differentiation. One's brand narrative and alignment. It's something that sort of Adam touched on, but developing that distinctive narrative and alignment of your organisation with that narrative and service philosophy. I'm going to talk about utility. I'm going to ask Elaine to talk about that because I'd really like to know whether PayPal's success has been driven mainly on its ubiquitousness and utility, or is there something else that's driving that to be one of the most trusted brands in Australia. And then we're going to talk about how does this technology interface with some of the traditional channels we operate. I'm going to ask Angus to mainly talk about that. There are no boundaries here. There are no demarcation disputes. They're able to talk on any of those topics as they wish and interact. And of course, I'm going to say that we're going to go live with the Q&A now, the AXA Investment Managers Q&A, and it will be open for the duration of the session. So you can send your questions via the Cmsf app. And we're in Forum A, and you'll find the poll under Polls and Live Q&A in the app. So, first of all, I'm going to turn to Rob to perhaps open the proceedings and talk about the importance of brand narrative and aligning your organisation, importantly, with that narrative to make sure you deliver on it.
Thanks, Geoff. I should also say I agree. I'm with the audience on investment returns. That's how I would have voted. It's the first thing I always go to with the statement of my fund. So what I'm going to try to do is set a simple framework. As Geoff said, you've heard all sorts of things over the last couple of days. It's how I come at things, look at the world, and then within that framework, hopefully that makes it clear how I would suggest thinking about CX, customer experience. So for me, everything has to start with, if you're in a competitive category, which obviously all of you are, whether it's business to business or business to consumer, you have to know why us versus them. This will always be the case. 100 years from now, probably, even if it's robots sitting here debating it, they still have to be a better robot than you. So that requires you to really distill the benefit you want to represent in your target audience. Sometimes it's narrow. Obviously, some brands have a very narrow target audience. Others, like McDonald's, has a very broad one. Then there's everything in between. So what benefit do we want to represent in their head? At the end of the day, a brand is mental real estate. It's collective memory. You may have heard Ehrenberg Bass talking about it. And what you have to do to build that is have a coherent architecture. So is it going to be a purpose or a positioning that drives us and associated values, and out of that then you can start thinking about your brand portfolio so it's coherent in bringing that purpose or positioning to life. Identity and comms and all those other things, customer experience comes later. So I'll come back to why that's very relevant, I think, all the way when you go to the end and you go, right, voice for CX. So you've got to start with brand DNA, and then a commonly forgotten step, and it's massively relevant now as we're seeing all around the world, is employee experience before customer experience. Companies are more transparent than they've ever been. It used to be just a few people that touched the customer. Now almost everybody is customer facing because of peer-to-peer culture, digitization of platforms, all that sort of thing. So you've got to have your people feeling in their minds, in the environment that they're experiencing and the behavior that they're demonstrating, the same brand, the same DNA needs to be alive and distinctive and motivating within the employee experience. And then when you've got that, you've then got a chance of being consistently excellent at customer experience, because the touch points are so varied, real time, always growing. You're never going to be perfect with all of them. But if you've got a bunch of people who are highly motivated and know what makes you distinctive, back to that primary challenge of the marketplace, then you can bring that to the different touch points. So to get very specific to the CX question, if you think about the funnel, which is relevant to whatever category you're in, obviously there's a lot of emphasis on membership here, so that's the keeping and retaining and getting them up to, maybe if you've got a more premium product, but basically the funnel is unaware, aware, through to obviously engaged, preference, purchase, keep, up. Then all throughout that funnel, everything is a touch point, everything's customer experience. It's prospective customer experience if they're not a customer yet, which is obviously where a lot of advertising lies, or word of mouth, and it's very much utility if it's further down the funnel and it's about retention. So I think the approach always has to be very holistic, because to be coherent in a very competitive environment, you've got to be having that consistent experience for your customers all the way through that funnel. You need to be very clear about obviously the task for the CX touch point according to where it is in that funnel and what you want as a response. So it's never going to be one answer, and you're always going to need to embrace voice over here at the same time as for those who want to have a human to talk to, having the same data underneath your voice AI service as well as your human on the phone, so that they can demonstrate that they know you as much as the voice demonstrates that they know you. So that's how I would come at CX. But the danger in just giving all of it over to digitization and tech and all that sort of stuff is that it just becomes a homogenized thing in a market. Everyone's doing the same, everything. It's just, you might have a head start of about a month, but then everyone's going to catch up. And that's where you've got to think about motivating hygiene factors, but motivators that are differentiating.
Thanks, Rob. I might come back to later to the process you go through to actually distill that point of difference and so on, and come and develop your narrative, because it's very, very difficult to do in a sort of a sometimes ill-defined space, especially when investment returns are the driver of importance to members. I'm going to now move to Angus, and look, virtual reality is something that we haven't touched on this conference. You've gone from TV producing to virtual reality. That's sort of putting people in the studio in a sense. So could you talk about how that virtual reality may be, I find it hard to envisage how we'd use it in super, but I know some people have used it for designing customer experience in the super sector.
I mean, I thought what I might do is I'd kick it off just giving, because I think it's a very fair point, that where does virtual reality sit within the whole super world? And, now that there's all these other new buzzwords that have eclipsed virtual reality, but I still want you guys to be buzzword compliant, obviously. I feel like you need to get maybe a bit of an overview on it and a bit of an understanding around it. So these are the principles of VR, and I think it's a really useful tool. So what I thought I'd just do is very, very quickly just give a top-line summary of it, and so that you can see how these filters might apply to your organizations, because VR is not driven by category so much as it is driven by these filters. So if you're looking at an audience or a consumer play, and you can see how these different filters can come into it, then I think there's an opportunity for VR to be applicable. And it's interesting, we've got a number of financial organizations that are using us not only for the agency and interaction play around it, but then also for being able to see their own experience as they get older, and that kind of piece, as well as then understanding others. So it's quite useful. I really like the point you made about brand is mental real estate. And what we find is that if you're able to position a brand in such a way through VR, people have a greater retention of that information. It's such a new technology that it actually has a lot more cut through. And so there's a lot more benefit in that regard for being able to get your message across. And also in terms of visualization of information as well. So within that, there's a whole range of different VR pieces, and it's just useful to sort of understand the landscape. So passive VR or the presentation space will be if we chucked 2D content up here, and you put on the goggles and you saw that content, and you're still in a 360 environment, that's your presentation space. 360 video goes from consumer versions where you can now get these little cameras and you can do your little Facebook 360, right through to the sort of stuff we do, which is really crafted VR experiences where you're using techniques, a lot of which are in theatre. Everything's a wide shot in VR. So the idea is that you use sound and lighting cues to motivate the user as to where they're going to look. And so if I'm looking over here and then I hear something over here, I look up and there's something up close, then that's the way that you can move people through a story. And the interactive and gaze-based, the idea with those is they're then non-linear pieces. So if you're looking at agency and engagement with people whereby they want to be able to make choices, then this is where VR gets really interesting, because it's like the old school choose your own adventure. You can actually, using gaze-based navigation, look at an icon whilst you've got the goggles on and then trigger that content. And you can then have that branch out and go into a whole raft of different ways. So if you're looking at visualizing a case study or what someone's story might be, depending on what choices they make at different stages, life stages, then that becomes a really useful tool to be able to visualize that and get that message across. And then room scale, which is just a really cool thing, is basically where you've got two pieces and you create it so that you can walk around the actual space. And so rather than it being these goggles, which is 3 degrees of freedom where you can look up, down, left, right, room scale allows you to actually walk through the entire space and actually engage in different points with it. So that's just a bit of a snapshot there. And then within this, I think it's also useful because people often muddle up AR and VR. So AR is basically when you've got an interface and you're layering over it additional information. So VR, you put the goggles on, you're totally locked away. AR is where you've got real life and you're combining it with graphics. So the other parts to it, just very quickly, is these are all the range of devices. So cardboard, which is this Qantas example there, really helpful for branding, but essentially it's just an entry-level piece. And then if you go right through to the far on the as you're looking at it on that side, left, then you've got the tethered room scale pieces as well. And so then just within that 3 degrees of freedom is just the up, down, left, right, and the 6 degrees is where you can actually walk around the space. So the other pieces around this is just, these are some of the cool new Hemsworth wearing a 6 degrees. So basically, the reason why I put this slide in is because what's going to happen is over the next 6 months, the accessibility and price points into VR is just going to totally change. It's going to become so much cheaper and more accessible that in a bit like the way Dr. Dre and his headphones, and everyone was like, there's no way I'm going to wear headphones when I'm on the train, and now everybody's doing it. You're going to find within the next couple of years that VR is going to be a standard piece and everyone's going to be using it all the time. So I'll just skip through. This is the camera that we use. It's super cool. It's an Ozo. It's about the size of a soccer ball. It's got left and right eye. And so the idea of that is that when you're shooting something, your left and right eye actually see the world slightly differently. And so by using this camera, you get a sense of depth. And you can actually position people in the foreground or background. And so it means that if you were to do an interview with someone and you wanted to be able to show where they are in that position, then you can then live monitor it. So part of the thing I think with this kind of thing is to be able to have authenticity and to be able to tell a story correctly. And so if you've got the equipment that allows people to be relaxed as you're doing the recording, it makes it a lot more effective. I'll just skim through the last little pieces. So essentially what we've got here is all the different VR platforms that are out there, and what we've done is build an app that will work across all those different platforms so that you've got the distribution regardless of how you want to go. So you can leverage it on digital channels as well as through your VR platforms. And off the back of that, then there's a range of different ways that can work, so that you've got it so that it works as a 2D version or as a VR interface. And then you can also use it with all these different functionalities, which is a really powerful tool. The heat map and analytics, the multi-language, so you can actually have it so that if your phone's Japanese, and we've made a Japanese version, then immediately when you upload the app, you get the Japanese version of that. And so off the back of that, you can see from the range of clients that we've got that there's no category-specific play within it. It's those 5 filters that I've been talking about at the start that really defines the opportunities that you've got with VR. Right.
Well, you're making us feel positively steam-powered.
Okay, very good.
Okay,
Steam
so
power, that's edgy. Yeah.
because some of us are still struggling to get apps out, you know, so I might need to come back to that. So we get to Elaine. Bring us back to earth and talk about PayPal, that ubiquitous brand where we pay for things. And I think it's still owned by eBay.
No.
No, it's sold off.
Publicly quoted for 2 years.
Oh, okay. So it's out there in the free world.
It is.
And Elaine's responsible for making it the most trusted brand. Could you tell us whether that's all been about utility, or is there more to PayPal than meets the eye?
Oh, I think there's more to any business than meets the eye, but what happens these days is all of your processes are and your experience is so exposed to your customer, because there is that ubiquity and there are so many different touch points regardless of what channel that you use something like PayPal for. When it comes to brand and trust and PayPal, I guess the first thing to say is that PayPal, when it was started up in Australia, which, believe it or not, is about 18 years ago, so not really a startup anymore, but more of a teenager, as we like to call it internally, it really solved a customer problem, and that was pay safely, get access to lots of goods and services via eBay, as you said, Geoff, at the time, and it really made it a very easy, seamless and trusted process to pay online, because we weren't used to paying online at that time. It's hard to believe that there was a time when we did not pay for stuff online, and it was considered a very risky process. That said, the customer experience at PayPal is something that has always been at the heart of the organization. That is, how do you make it easy? How do you make it fast? How do you put good processes in place when something goes wrong? And as you say, how do you give people their money back when something goes in a different way to what they imagined? And I think that's one point I want to talk about here, is that we are deferring and defaulting to technology now when we talk about customer experience, but in fact, it is the whole sum of everything that you do. It is your people, it is your processes, it is your touch points, and that can be a contact center, people call us, it can be your social media presence, it's your product experience, as well as how you interact with the technology that a company has. So it's really important that all of those things work together, and you create that utility that you guys talked about. But utility is great, and you have to have it, because customers and members are so demanding that we are not now comparing, obviously I do check my super. I am one of those people. I have worked in superannuation, so I know how important it is. But I don't compare my Australian super app or my Mine experience with just other super funds. I'm comparing it to Amazon, I'm comparing it to Uber, I'm comparing it to, where I do my online grocery shopping. So we're very demanding, and we're making sure, and we're not just, comparing in categories. But the key thing around all of that is I still, as a consumer, and consumers in general, still want that emotional connection and that trust with their brands and with the businesses that they are with. And one of the things that we have found has worked really well for us at PayPal, because it is truly part of the DNA of the organization actually, is a fit around values and around purpose. And the more that we have driven the utility and the customer experience and making sure that we're continually investing in that, we have to do that. That's a come to the game. There is no question around that. We're competing against some of the best in the world in terms of customer experience, and we want to be the best in the world around that. But we also want people to love us. And I was in San Jose a couple of weeks ago, and I saw for the first time our global CEO from PayPal speak. And he was asked, what brands do you like or admire? And he said, any brand that has the words "I love" in front of them is a brand I admire. And that is about an emotional connection. How we've done it at PayPal more is a stance around values, actually. And that has been for us often around taking a stance on diversity, inclusion, marriage equality in Australia, before it was fashionable to do so.
So how do you bring that to life
Actually,
for your external customers?
Through that, I think that is where marketing actually can come into play, and having people speak about your values, using your channels, reinforcing it to your existing base. We've got 7.1 million consumers in Australia, so very easy for us to get that kind of ubiquity. Many of you will have seen the results of the Edelman Trust Barometer for 2018, I think, where actually something like 77% of Australians are saying that they want company CEOs one of their main jobs to be to establish trust and to talk publicly about the issues that are important to Australians and actually take a stance on them and not sit on the fence.
Rob, I might come back to you on that point.
Can I just say that was entirely not what I had planned to say. I had a whole bunch of notes.
No one's saying anything they
thanks,
plan
Geoff.
to say. That's okay, you know. But Rob, I might come back to you on that because I think alignment with your narrative drives that trust. The other thing I'm interested, though, in asking is, we always say, what drives trust? I'd like to know what drives distrust.
Yeah, I think, and it relates to what you were saying about, what were the two things you brought it down to, care and...
Utility, care. Do you care about me?
Yeah, so I think it's quite hard sometimes to delineate between those because if you give me what I want, when I want, in a seamless way, which is sort of utility, then I'm also feeling like you're caring about me. Take the category I was in recently, subscription television. Netflix obviously has revolutionised that space worldwide by using the means of tech and different arrangements with content to deliver what you want, when you want, where you want. And that's become now a hygiene factor of the category. They had the first mover advantage really, but obviously everyone's gone into the streaming space, different sorts of over-the-top apps as they're called. And that's an example of sort of extreme utility enabling a personalised experience of House of Cards or whatever it is. So yeah, that's almost like the convergence of care and utility. To the point about conveying what you're about, though, as a brand, on top of that, assuming everybody else catches up, and then that's a hygiene thing again, because it sort of is. Sticking with the Netflix example, I don't know whether you would have seen this, but there was an incident last year where Stranger Things, one of their biggest shows, somebody illegally set up a pop-up shop in the style of Stranger Things. I think it was basically a super fan just demonstrating their love for the show, but it was breaking all sorts of, usage agreements. And rather than write the usual cease and desist letter, they wrote it in the style of the show. The kids, it's sort of a Spielberg-esque 80s nostalgia piece. They wrote it in that style. They still conveyed all of the information that needed to be conveyed, basically saying stop doing it or we'll sue you. But I think they said, or we'll have to tell your mum in the letter. Now this is coming from one of the world's most progressive big international companies writing a legal letter that saying otherwise we'll tell your mum. And that's why every touch point is an opportunity to convey what you stand for and what your values are. Loads of other companies would have just, somebody would have pumped that out and it would have been a template, bang. Whereas now that's an opportunity to convey what we're about that transcends the hygiene factors to get that love, to build that mental real estate, which creates preference. And although Byron Sharp and the gang at Member Bird Bass sounds like they were talking about utility, they also talk about the importance of mental and physical availability and that emotional connection, that salience in the mind is what drives preferential behaviour.
That's much more hard to catch up on than it is the functionality, because everybody has access to the technology. We all have access to people and contact centres.
I wouldn't assume we all have access to the technology.
We have, should we wish to have it.
We wish to have it, yeah.
I mean, it's an easier thing to catch up on, but it is much more difficult for any organisation to replicate or compete on with a competitor who has a very high level of trust or emotional connection with their consumers or with their members, because they get them, they're doing what's right for them, they're there when things go wrong, especially. And if you have that hook in with someone, it's a relationship, not a transaction, and that's much more difficult to displace.
Yeah, it's interesting. We a lot of different clients and brands have come to us because they have an issue with trust. And so they're actually looking at going, how can we realign by using a new technology that is able to give an authenticity to our story. And so, we've had different organisations where there's been scepticism around the process. And so by being able to create an experience where you've got it in VR, then people can actually visualise and see each step of the process. And in doing so go, oh, okay, these guys are authentic, I can see that. And then they've leveraged that across all those other channels as well. So I agree, technology is easy, just throw money at it, relatively, but trust is a far harder thing to capture.
Yeah, and to your point, Geoff, about how do you earn distrust, not doing what you say you're going to do. is obviously a big one with customers, isn't it? I mean, you know, every category I've touched, I've seen examples of that where we've let the customer down because we haven't done what we said we were going to do. We didn't stream live the thing that they'd paid to see live. The tech fell over, or the installer didn't turn up when they were supposed to in the 2-hour slot to put the PVR in. You know, all of these are ways where you go back 3 paces and you build at 1. You know, so it's you know, it's very difficult to build trust, and that's why those companies like a Telstra that has established sort of top trust position have to work so hard to retain it because it's so valuable. But you can't ever rest on your laurels and have to keep on keeping on earning that position.
Well, I just remind people that the Q&A thing is live, so questions from the floor are welcome. I think they're all awake after the gala dinner, which it's all good. We haven't seen any questions yet, but we'll crash on regardless. What I'd like to do before we've got a reasonable amount of time left, I'd like to sort of explore with each of you. We talk about these technologies and these values and narratives and all that sort of thing. You're starting from scratch. How do you go through, or you're revamping where you're starting from where you are now? How do you go forward, and what's the process look like to actually bring all this to life? I mean, I think it can be daunting to sort of hear it all, but
I would always go back to those building blocks. You know, the brand DNA articulation, how that then manifests in your employee experience authentically in a motivating and distinctive way, and then how that then is expressed to customers through the funnel. And on the brand DNA point, you know, it's easy to just think, oh yeah, that's easy because that's just really for the Nikes and the Cokes and the Apples and the Disneys. And it of course isn't. I mean, I was experiencing GoDaddy the other day, you know, the domain site. Now that's on paper, that's an extremely functional service, but they have chosen to have a point of view, which is we celebrate the small business, gig economy. That's our customer image that we want to celebrate. And a bit like Nike have gone, we celebrate athleticism and athletes, and we want to inspire and innovate for them. GoDaddy have just taken a point of view in the founder, because that's what excites him. He's obviously in himself got that startup zeal and energy, and that's the spirit and that embodies everything that they do, that then colours just setting up domain names and various other things. So it does take a very human act, I think, right at the start to go, what's our point of view? And it's not an excuse to say we're low interest as a category, or it's a very homogenous category. They're not valid excuses. In a sense, it's even more easy to have a point of view because there's nothing else.
Well, at PayPal, we've got a huge workforce around the world. Yeah. How many people do PayPal employ?
14,000 globally.
14,000.
About 130 or so in Australia.
So what was the process that you went through at PayPal to bring those values to life? How did you engage with the internal people and actually have them live the values?
I think we have about, as I said, about 130 people in the Australian business. And actually, I've been at PayPal for 2 years. I think this started to be much more earnest, actually, and much more serious when PayPal was publicly quoted and spun off from eBay. And we got a new CEO who is very purpose and values driven, actually. And that, you know, that culture is driven from the top of any organization, as we know. What we do in PayPal, a lot of it does center around the core values that the organization has, and trying to give people that leeway to be actually customer champions is one of our values, but actually trying to make that true for them. And what that means in PayPal is, you know, we have, for example, in Australia, we have something that we call the Ministry of Culture. So it's a group of employees from across the business. It sounds very fintech, doesn't it? When I came from banking, I thought that sounded really funny, I must admit. But I was like, oh, the Ministry of Culture. It sounds like something out of a Harry Potter movie. But we have people from across the business, 5 or 6, who are representing culture by the people, for the people, is what we call it. And they've got 3 or 4 streams. One of them is innovation. So how can we work with not just people inside our organization now, but actually support startups, for example, and help them use our office space, or help them get access to legal services or marketing expertise or sales expertise. We've got something around wellness, inclusion as well, because it's a really important value at PayPal, and just actually a series of activities, and those guys have a voice at the leadership team table and tell us what they want, and we just generally do it.
I think this is a really important question because our top polling question from the floor is, where do you start with implementing the employee experience and delivering this concept across an organisation? And this may seem strange to go to the virtual reality guy about this, but I believe you use VR with Qantas to actually do some work internally.
Yeah, so Qantas has done a piece. It's not with us. We've done other stuff with Qantas, but this was a separate company that they engaged for this, where they were using VR as a superannuation tool so as to engage their employees with super and to actually get them to start to think about what choices that they make and what the impact would be on that. And also it was part of a broader cultural thing of Qantas wanting to make clear to their employees that they do care and that, what the choices that they make outside of their, job but impact on their whole life is part of what, as a company, that they want to be supportive of. And so that was the thinking behind that. And I think that part of that is, as you were saying before, that, if it's a dry category and you're doing something, it doesn't have to be a lot. Just doing something there that reflects the broader values of the organisation can work really well to help reframe for employees or potential customers the benefits.
So the question of where do you start and how do you bottle it and then how do you take it into the EX? Unless it's a founder company, and there are books written about how it's quite easy when you're 3 people and out, versus a bank or something that's been around for 20 years and it's got a new team. If you're not in the founder situation, you've got to go through a period of distillation to the truths, and it's a sort of strategic task, looking at qual and quant interviews, talking to the people who obviously work inside the business but also very much outside. So it's a strategic process of distillation to go, what is it about us that is enduring rather than iterating? And so that through that process you get to your unique, obviously, DNA being...
I presume that requires a fairly deep dive into your heritage.
Absolutely.
As much where you come from as where you're going.
Yeah, you need to interrogate all aspects of the value proposition. Brand equity, which includes heritage, your product or service, what have you provided since day one, in which aspects is it on a par versus differentiating, what can you hold on to over the long term, are some of those differentiators enduring, you really do have a USP, the old school USP, most people don't now, So yeah, you have to interrogate the whole, the service proposition, price, and so that interrogation leads you to your DNA, but it has to be something that motivates people. Obviously, it transcends making money. And then taking it to EX, you've got to make it, as Elaine was saying, meaningful to everybody. It can't be most meaningful to the marketers or the salespeople or the product designers. So you've got to authentically get it interpreted in every division. And one way of doing that is, what does this mean we keep? What does this mean we stop? What does this mean we start? So the classic keep, stop, start sort of exercise. But you want to have it user generated. You want divisions to take responsibility for manifesting it rather than just be told. And so you've got to create a culture where that is encouraged and celebrated. It's got to be baked into review systems. The values need to be baked into performance reviews, right to the CEO. It all falls down if the top table isn't role modeling.
I'll just step in with a question from the floor because it actually addresses that point. What's the KPI for customer experience and how do you convert it to money? Obviously, someone who doesn't believe in the bitcoins next door. All those grey pale male boards will not fund a fab like a branding-driven CX.
Can I answer that one?
I think it was a fad it's supposed to be.
So, if you think about customer experience, and I'd like to add a little bit on how you can practically use it. Basically, what you're trying to do is, attract, engage, and retain your customers. And we all know from working in various industries how expensive it is to get new customers, but how that can often be the shiny object that we have. And in superannuation in particular, obviously we've got new people coming into the workforce and we have people swapping. But getting people to change super funds is, as we all know, is pretty difficult because we have a low engagement category. But the fact is, if your customer experience isn't working, you are not going to be optimizing your ability to keep the customers that you have, keep their business and keep their, in our industry in superannuation, their SG or their rollovers, and making sure that all of their super is with you, and then they're going to leave you. And you know, that is probably the best answer that I can give anyone on why we should be interested in customer experience, because our customers are the reason superannuation funds are in business. Our customers are the reason any of us are in business, whether you're in a sort of a profit or a member-only returns kind of scenario. But one thing I'd like to add around how do you make it practical, because I think sometimes we talk about customer experience and all of us shrink a little bit in our seat because it sounds so big, it sounds so daunting, and it sounds like you have to re-engineer your entire organization. And none of us have the time, money, or probably the tenure for that, let's be honest. So I think it's about, you can bite off bits of it. You can go holistic on it, and you can go, how do I map the customer journey and the experience from woe to go? But I would say you do it from both a functional and an emotional play. So what are the bits of the customer experience that you need to go, somebody needs a great experience when they start out. They need a great experience when they have a couple of difficulties or when they need help. And certainly we know that in superannuation, if you have to access your super or you have to access insurance, those are the places you probably want to over-index on. You need a great experience. You always need to leave the customer. One of the principles, I guess, of customer experience is have a great end point, because it leaves a great lasting impression and helps your retention. But you can break that off at pretty much any point in the process. You could do that for your onboarding. You could do that for your member communications around, please consolidate your superannuation. And you can do that at any smaller point across your process that you need to. And it doesn't always have to involve lots of expense or lots of extra resources, because actually people in organizations do know a lot about their members or their customers. And sometimes it's about tapping it in and going, what does it look like when you onboard a customer in every single touch point? Where do we over-index? Where do we just stay neutral? Where does this not matter to my customer? Because, by the way, all of us will have different types of customers. If you've got a digital native kind of group, I guess you're going to want to have more simpler digital processes. But if you're mapping an insurance claims process and you know people like high touch and you've got a high value member base, you might want to over-index on personal and human touch, as well as having great systems underneath it. So I think there are ways to break down customer experience so that it becomes much more manageable and much more doable within any size of organization, so that you can actually kind of hit the ground running on it.
I think it's a really good summary, because a lot of the presentations we see are very much looking at a single channel, which tends to be the digital channel, and you've just given a good expose on how you can bring, it should be an omni-channel view and be able to transfer across those channels according to where the member is on the journey.
Yeah, technology is a how, not a why.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing to remember.
Absolutely isn't a sort of a fad or something unconnected to commercial outcomes.
Absolutely.
So, your cost to serve is, it's a way to both reduce costs and improve profits, isn't it? Because if you're getting to the resolution quicker, it's good for the customer and it's good for you.
Yeah, look, I've got two questions from the floor here for Angus, and I'm going to wrap the two together, because the first one is, what will stop VR going the same way as 3D TV? I'm not quite sure what way 3D TV's gone, but
we'll leave you. Well.
And the other one is, can you give us a case study or a user case on how VR could be applied in super?
Okay. All right. Well, firstly, on the first one, 3D TV versus VR. Good question. I like it, because basically, whilst I might be managing director of a virtual reality studio, I'm actually like old school when it comes to all forms of technology. I still turn up at meetings with my calendar printed out on a piece of paper, and I write in that, because that way when people are arguing about the dates and faffing around with their phones, I can just point and go, 4 weeks, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. So with those sort of things in mind, I just think when it comes to 3D TV, what that was a technology that was being added onto a pre-existing experience that was already a really good experience. Like, TV has killed it since the 50s. So, and it didn't add value. It didn't actually benefit. It was fiddly, and it was crappy experience, you know, from a utility perspective right through to actually, you know, how much of an enhancement did it give for the amount of effort and cost. The difference with VR is that it's its own platform. It's its own form of media. There's different techniques that are coming into it that, like our business is made up of gamers and digital designers, agency types, filmmakers, and it's the convergence of all these different skills that have come together to create a new art form. And so the reason why it won't go like 3D TV is 3D TV was just an add-on to an existing technology, whereas VR is actually the creation of a new form of entertainment and information platform that hasn't been done before. And because in a world where it's a lot more fractured in terms of there's multiple screens and all this sort of play, VR is a very immersive experience. You put on the goggles and 3 minutes in VR feels like 15 minutes of TV because it is so full on. And so there's real value that comes from that, and that's what people are interested in and engaged by. So you know, it's kind of apples and oranges on that one. But the immersion of VR also, I think, is a real benefit when it comes to looking at something like Super, because one of the things that you can do in VR is you can play with space and time really, really effectively, and you've drawn your user in and they're engaged with it, then it means that you can then muck around with how you want to do that. And I think one of the things with Super is that it's really, you know, I'm speaking from personal experience. For the past 15 years, I've been putting down each year, remember to review what Super you've got and choose a better one. And I haven't got around to it yet. And that is because I can't visualize, I can't see the benefit of what it would mean if I made that choice. And every year that I leave it, then it's diminishing the value of if I had made that choice. And so when you're, you know, in your 30s or 40s or late 20s, and you're looking at something like that, you can't see what your retirement's going to look like. You can barely see what the rest of the week's going to look like. So with that in mind, I think that the opportunity that Super has is to actually create an experience that engages with people when they're at the start of that journey, and allows them to be able to visualize what their life would be. And actually to go, right, so the little thing that I do here, what's going to be the ripple-on effect down the track? And then using space, because when you put the goggles on, you can create a really confined space, and then you can make it totally expansive and be on massive fields and that kind of thing. So you can really play with that, and then you're going to hit them in the heart, and then that will motivate them to then make an objective decision based on what they need to do, but at least they'll have the motivator coming from an emotional perspective, which is where I think that if you know, I keep hooking back to this brand and heart and all that sort of business, and I love whatever it may be, that's what you need to do. So I think that that's where it comes into play.
I think the phrase you used, visualising the future in a sense, or visualising the future you want to have. You know, if you position yourself as a fund, you know, we're your partner in the future retirement you want to have, or, you know, however it's articulated, but the point of view is very much about the emotional place ahead. Then you work back from that and visualise it in a really relevant way to different people using tech to personalise that visualisation.
There was an experience.
It just takes what's going on in other categories into this category, which the consumer is expecting.
Yeah.
Could I just challenge something you said earlier, which was the ubiquitousness of VR and how widely deployed it'll be, because sooner or later we're going to have to get on the train or the bus with a backpack with all our tech on it, you know? It's, you know, just how's it going to work in I can understand in face-to-face and controlled environments that, you know, you can hand out a headset to everybody and they can all experience it, but well, how does it happen in that more remote thing where you've got someone sitting in regional Australia who's... it doesn't
have to be VR, though, does it? I mean, I took your point to be visualisation of the data you have. VR is one way in which you could do it, but apps are another. You know, bank apps are very good at representing your total portfolio, aren't they, now?
So there's kind of two parts to it. In terms of visualisation, you're absolutely right. There was one execution I saw where it was to visualise your future, and it was like they took a photo, you take the photo, and then they show how old you look in 30 years. Like, that is not motivating me to do my Super. I'm sorry. But the flip side...
Botox, mate.
Yeah, well, geez. But the flip side of it, in terms of your question about the ubiquity of VR, what's going to play and what is already happening is, if you go back to the 80s and all those video arcades, and you go to the video arcade to play your game, and already what we're seeing is a whole proliferation of VR. location-based entertainment where you go to a specific spot and you can then do the VR piece there. So that's one. And then what will happen is that'll then translate to home, and then that'll get made smaller and smaller until it becomes like a straight-up play. And that'll happen over the next 5 years, like, you know, forget about it. That's going to happen. But separate to that, what you're going to then see, and this is what I think large organisations are already doing, is that they can control that environment, whether it be from a consumer perspective when they're doing events or activations, or whether it be when they're looking at internal comms. And so because they've got that controlled environment, they can already do that appointment to view type play. And so you're going to see corporations like running with VR, and you're going to see the entertainment field happening outside of the workplace, and those two will converge over the next 5 years, and it'll be banked in.
I feel that what hasn't happened yet in this space is still quite fragmented, it feels to me, and I'm a proper layman in this space, so, you know, take this as just a customer speaking, you know. My bank app represents my fund, my super within it, but it doesn't talk to my fund. So I have to manually put in the value of it. As far as I'm aware, it doesn't automate in any way. So it's a leading bank app. It tries to have a holistic view of my financial health. It can't talk to my super, and so it's this sort of dead figure that just I have to update.
I think I know the app you're talking about. I think it might be the same bank.
Right, but that's an opportunity, isn't it, to visualise what that means and for it to update in real time. I don't know, you know, so if you choose to go there, then you end up doing interesting innovation work with partners like banks. If that's the touch point you augment rather than trying to build your own. You know, there's loads of opportunity on it.
Look, we've only got a few minutes left, and I am going to throw this question to Elaine, because I think if she can really talk to this, it might take all the time we've got, to explain how do you think we can really make customers love their super fund?
What a great question. I did see that because I was reading the questions on the right, and I thought, oh, better prepare for that one. It's difficult, right? I mean, I think having worked in the industry, we know the level of sort of disengagement that many Australians have with their superannuation. We know that it's difficult in an industry that keeps changing the rules, or perceived to be changing the rules around how you get access, how much you can put in, what the caps are, and even that level of confidence in the superannuation industry with all the tinkering that happens on a seemingly fairly regular basis around reg, etc. I think, though, where I would start on super, I would like to think that that is a yes, because people should have the ability to be that attached and love the people who are looking after their money, because it is such a fundamental, you know, enabler of what you do in later life, that to think that you have a lump of money that is sitting with someone and you trust them, and that is a brand and a business that you love doing business with. I like to think aspirationally that it is possible. I think in superannuation, we should start, though, with preference, actually, and liking. And I think, you know, the super industry and many of the players in it have done a superb job of looking after members. It's just, often that message doesn't get past the members that it looks after. And I will also commend, I think the industry super funds have done a tremendous job. And I can tell you from my retail super jobs is we hated that, absolutely hated it. But I think as a consumer, I think it's a very clever, a very simple message that has really resonated with customers. So I think let's strive for preference and genuine liking. And again, often this is, people talk about fees, people talk about investment returns, but I bet, apart from in this room, if you went outside and said, what's the return, you know, the 12-month return on your, or 3-month return on your super fund for the last couple of years, would you know? People wouldn't have a clue, because there just isn't that level of sort of proximity to it. But, so yes, I think yes, we should be aiming for loving a super fund. I have loved my super funds, actually, a few of them. Not monogamous on it, though, that's the problem, so if you didn't love them enough to stay forever. But I think drive for preference and actually show what you stand for. And I think, you know, again, many of the industry funds in particular have a great story to tell around, we really look after this bunch of members, we do everything that we can for you, we're driving the utility and we're investing in that, but actually this is more about how we care for you and we're there for you. You don't need us so much when things are all going well, we get it, but we're really there for you in the moments where life hits you, and life hits us all at one point or another.
Well, it's a nice note to finish on. Everyone should love their super fund. I think you've got a couple of experiences here that may say that you're not there yet, guys, but anyway. That's the conclusion of this session. I hope, thank you for the questions from the audience. The AX has been really appreciated. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Cheers.